I
Mm.
think that's why we love fitness, because it's measurable. It feels like you have autonomy. It feels like you have control. When we start to talk about spiritual health, it's like, well, how do you measure that? And so we revert back to ways that you can measure it. Oh, I read my Bible every day. Oh, I prayed. Oh, I did these things. And the truth is that those are deep, murky waters, but they're no less true. And I think a great definition of health is that we're thriving in all dimensions of human experience.
So there's some truth to this, and then there's probably some, I'm a little bit too extreme. So the reality of the story is probably not 100% accurate. But in 2018, I didn't have the baby. My wife did, our third born son, having just had a baby in the NICU for 70 days, having just had 10 foster kids, having just planted a church. We were pretty jammed up emotionally. We were pretty stressed and just started seminary, like I mentioned. So it was 2018 and church is going well. We're trying to get a building. We're trying to get this thing off the ground a lot more efficiently and have a little more life in it. And in that, we hire a church consultant. Never, ever hire a church consultant. That part is not an exaggeration. And through that process, what I was really looking for was to get some more help, is what I thought, some external help. And so 3 of my buddies, who are the elders of the church, sit me down off the cuff, in large part due to this consultant, and I'm fired. And these are 2 of my best friends, and the other guy's one of my dearest friends. And it sure feels like I'm fired, but I wasn't quite fired. It was more like, hey, you're not doing so good. You need to sit this one out. And so they said an immediate leave of absence, 6 months, and we need to figure out what we're going to do with you, with the church. And the basis of it was I was really emotionally unhealthy. Like, I'm super intense. I can present well. I'm the grandson of a Baptist pastor in Houston, is one of the first megachurch pastors. So we know how to look good. My dad, from the stories I've already told you, is intense. My mom is emotional. And I know, Nix, you're not into personality tests because they're unscientific. I know they're unscientific in your view. However, I like them. And whatever personality test that I take, it's like you're super intense. D on the disc test, the big 5, Jordan Peterson, he really thinks they're scientific. And I'm really super neurotic. So just really
High on
emotional,
neuroticism.
high in neuroticism, very emotional. And it's like my greatest gift, but my greatest weakness. And I was super unhealthy emotionally, spiritually, and physically. My doctor, Troy Neal, shout out Troy Neal, he's like, I want you to lose some weight. And I was like, why? I'm fine. I was like 185, still would bench, but I was like swollen everywhere. It was just puffy. It wasn't muscles. It was basically beer and shame. And so anyway, I that December 31st, I walked into my first CrossFit class at the gym in Lake Highlands, and I never looked back. And for it, like CrossFit became like this real sacred place because I couldn't control anything. 3 boys. I mean, we bring the baby home, Felix, that night. Of course, he doesn't sleep. My wife's just had the baby. Our 2-year-old throws up in his bed, or 1-year-old, or whatever. The 5-year-old didn't sleep at all. I mean, it was just nuts. And so CrossFit became like this real sacred thing to me where I could control something and I could see like these little tangible steps. And it became this huge part of just my journey back into health, a way that I could actually master my emotions. And so I did it really to, really to have a place where I could get out the high intense emotion. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got started in CrossFit, if that was the question. But
it's a good layup to what we're talking about today, which is the deepest, darkest waters of health that there are. I'm with my friend John Bauer. John, you and I have known each other for a few years now. The first time, I don't think I've told you this, but the first time that I saw you, I was in the chapel at Lake Point,
Hmm.
where our children were both attending school at the same place at the time. And I'm going to give you a little insight into the dysfunctional psyche that I have. But typically, when I'm in a large group, I'll look around and I'll assess how poorly I fit in to that place that I'm at,
Mm.
which maybe is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe it's just fact. But I look around and be like, I wouldn't be friends with that guy. Wouldn't be friends with that guy. And I see this handsome young man with a cool hat on, long flowing hair,
Stetson.
and I say, you know what? I could probably be friends with that guy. And yeah, several years later, we connect and we've had lots of great conversations. But today, we're going to be talking about, uh, and we'll define this as we get into it, but a deeper level of health. We've talked a lot about physical performance. We talked about the biology of health, my passion's on the psychological aspect. But if you miss the spiritual side of health, you miss it all. And so you and I are going to do our level best to try to rein this in, because it's a conversation that obviously could go on, and I'm hoping that we have several of these. But our attempt is to try to connect what you just said, like regardless of what the consultant said, you were in a place where I would look at you and be like, okay, in one aspect of health, I mean, John's got a lot of things figured out. But in your own estimation, if health is a system and there's lots of things that work together, there were parts that you realized you reconciled as you got into the CrossFit gym for the first time that were missing.
Hmm.
And so the first question I have for you is it hard to be taken seriously because you're so handsome? Is that hard? Do you have a hard time
You
just
flatter me, but I think that
with that head of hair and tight skin? Is it just
bro, I've actually used to have a more full beard, and I'm seeing how gray it is, and now I'm getting all those freaking Instagram ads of some guy who's like 42 and tatted up and like looks like this, and he's like, part of my health is taking care of my face, and I'm like, ugh, this is so stupid. And then I
I get
click on it,
those
I'm like,
too.
do I need this now? And not to mention,
They almost got me too.
almost
They almost got me. There's a football player that's on there.
Tony Danza,
Yeah,
Tony Gonzalez.
Tony Gonzalez. Like, man, brings up some good points
Do you
here.
get the ED ones too?
No, dude.
I don't know
No,
where those
I've
come
never
from.
seen one of those.
It's because of my
John, what do we need to know about you? What are some, because you are the first person outside of the official hallowed grounds of BPR that's sitting here across from me. So we won't assume that um our consumer base knows who you are. What do we need to know about you?
Oh man. Well, I have 5 kids, and that always freaks people out. They ask if I'm Mormon or Catholic,
Mm,
or evangelical fundamentalist homeschool,
yeah,
which we
can't
were.
be anything. Oh, okay, yeah,
We were
yeah.
for a moment,
Mhm.
but once we found out we're having twins, so surprise, we went for number 4, had twin girls, so I'm a girl dad. Um, I
The
used
rest are boys.
the rest are boys, so 3 boys, 2 girls. Um, I would say, what do you need to know about me? Family is huge for us, obviously, because there's so many of us.
You have no choice.
I have no
Yeah.
choice. Yeah. Um, my wife and I've been married close to 15 years, and during that time, I mentioned earlier, 2018. One of the things that was awesome is that this process that she and I had, um, we wanted to do something together, and out of that came this company that we have launched, Neighborhood Supply. So we're opening up a shop in Lake Highlands in September. Super excited about that.
You too.
And I was a pastor for a long time, church planner. That ended post COVID. Now I'm CEO of a company here in Dallas, small SaaS based company, prop tech. Um, so those are some ancillary things. I freaking love the sound of a barbell hitting the ground.
Mm,
It is wonderful.
mm,
I really like people. I don't know, coffee. I used to like whiskey and stuff, but it hurts too much.
mm.
So love the Astros. I don't know. It's not very deep stuff, but
Well, I think it's a good start.
yeah.
So question number one, once you once you got into fitness, because I would say that maybe that's not true. I would say a lot of people, their final destination would be uh, existential health, or digging into the questions of purpose and why we're here on earth and what does my life mean. That's usually the last place to arrive to.
Mm-hmm.
And we start with something very superficial, like I want to look good and I want to perform well.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically what I found, right?
Your
Most people
best
that are in
life now.
here, yeah, we're just scratching the surface of why they're here, and it takes lots of coaching, lots of nurturing to get to some of these deeper questions. But for you, you had a really, I would say, robust foundation of those things that we typically save for the last, and then you came into fitness later in life, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, don't get me wrong. I was in my max and bench 300
Oh,
when I was 18.
okay. Save some for the rest of us,
Well,
man.
I was that kind of guy. I
Oh,
would kind of do bench and curls.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
short white guy, not a good athlete, decent athlete, but no, I didn't.
No stranger to the steel.
Oh yeah, huge tool. I was a tool. I had a white belt during the aughts.
Well, tell us how or what impressions fitness made on you. Like, go into a little bit more detail about what it is that you found really healthy by not just focusing on your spiritual or emotional health, but how the physical aspect changed you.
Well, I would say pain was the driver for it. We were in a big part of a. We were in a hard spot, my wife and I. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of insecurity, and so pain drove it. And the physicality of CrossFit became the outlet for it. But I would say, man, I had a good thought. Now it's gone. You know the book. I've texted you about this. The Body Keeps the Score. I can't pronounce the guy's name, but all of the stress and stuff, all of the emotional stuff. I had a good foundation. I asked the existential crisis question: why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Look how big the cosmos is. Are we just floating around a speck of dust around a huge star that's tiny compared to everything else? So I have that every other day for the
Mhm.
most part,
Mhm.
questioning my why. But I think as a former pastor, growing up in the theological stream that I did, I didn't have a good grid for the body. And so the body keeps the score. It's like, man, this place where you're walking around, yeah, this speck of dust that's floating around a star in the middle of the cosmos, all of the location of your emotions and your spiritual life, your mental life, your physical life, how you interact is in this body. And at least my stream of Christianity didn't handle it well. Like, they don't know how to handle sexuality, in my opinion. This is broadly speaking, sexuality, really even emotional life.
Mhm.
And so all of the stress, like I had constant cricks in my necks. I mean, if I sneezed or stretched wrong, I'd have a crick because I was just carrying stress, and I was doing
Hmm.
all of these things, not necessarily bad or sinful things if you're a Christian, but I was doing things that just weren't helping me out. And I was taking in all of this stress, and the things that I was doing to deal with it led me to this place where I was burnt out and I was done. Um, One of my mentors says, people don't act stupid for no reason. So I was doing these things and I didn't have a proper practice to actually deal with it. Um, if you're not a Christian, forgive me, but this is just the worldview that I came from. Like, the way you dealt with stuff was you read the Bible in 1 year because God wrote it in 1 year, or
This is
you
so
don't
good.
watch rated R movies. You don't drink too much, but I became more reformed, so I was allowed to drink. Um, but still, I was still carrying all this stuff in my body, so didn't know what to do with it. So CrossFit began um, to be this place where I could have an outlet, where I could master some of my emotions in the process. When you're doing Karen, which is the best name for a workout, given the last few years, Karen, 150 wall balls, like controlling your body, saying, I can handle this. These little practical things, I can do 10 more, take a breath of 5, and then go again. And so it began to offer me a way to master something because, again, my emotions are huge. Not everyone sees them, but they're massive. They can push people away, really to hell, like to shadow. And so that's where I think that, to answer your question, I didn't really take care of my body. I was okay at taking care of my emotions, okay of taking care of my spiritual life, but that's what I wanted to say. The spiritual practices that I have really didn't involve my body. And it was read the Bible in a year or pray really hard, which is just like saying, kind of like Will Ferrell and Talladega Nights, Tom Cruise, help me, Lord Jesus, help me. And it's like, if you prayed harder, then things would go well. And it didn't. It translated into being pretty overweight, having a bad thyroid, drinking too much, being stressed out, carrying all of this stress and pain, emotional pain in my body, and then taking it out on people that I loved the most. Not even like taking it out on them, but just being emotional in front of them in such a way that they're like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this guy? That's part of why my buddies were like, dude, you need to step out, because they didn't know how to handle my emotions. I didn't. And I've done a ton of work. My counseling bill is huge. Shout out CRC and Mayo Clinic. This podcast is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic in Richardson, Texas.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, man, that's why the physical nature of it really became a place where I could start to get healthier practices that address this spiritual being that had a body.
You're obviously a unique snowflake. There's no two John Bowers, but do you think that do you think this is common? Do you think this slant towards, hey, as long as I'm praying, reading my Bible, basically the church camp approach, right? As long as I'm doing the things that we do at church camp, I'm going to be okay.
I think in the post-COVID world, there's some fresh takes on how to be spiritual, and some of which feel, I think, to the old guard as scary.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really do think it's common, because it's hard not to. We live in Dallas, Texas, and so no matter your race, no matter your geographic location, there's some commonality to it. And in my opinion, looking back on the history of America, how theology has broached, if you look at just the history of church planting and whatnot, it's impacted from East Coast, to Dallas to the West Coast. And so yes, there's a very common, that came out of the Enlightenment, that came out of, post Dark Ages, where it's they said, okay, church, you deal with the spiritual stuff in heaven, we'll deal with the stuff down here. And that mentality, it's a very binary heaven or hell mentality. It's either all good or it's going to hell. Legit, I was driving home from my granddad's huge mega church in our station wagon and rolled down the window, because there's this gorgeous par 3 golf course in Houston that got bulldozed for a Sam's. And so they had just finished the parking lot, and there's these young kids driving around in their go-karts. So I rolled down the window. I'm like, you're going to hell. Because they didn't go to church, so it's this heaven or hell mentality. And so I don't know how I got in this, but now there's in that same kind of mentality, it's it's either all good or all bad. And so, yeah, I think in that, it's you only have these few options to deal with your spiritual life. It's it doesn't matter what happens with your body. It doesn't matter what happens, because it's all going to burn. So then you don't take care of your body. You don't think that there's anything for your body to do, because you're going to float around with a harp with Jesus. That's a bit extreme, and I'm not saying that people are preaching that, but that's part of what I came up with, was your body is bad. Because if you like it too much, you're vain, or you're an egotistical maniac, or you're a narcissist, or you could have sex and that might be bad, even though we have these penises and vaginas that are made for doing these type of things. Is that the first time you got that in there?
Yeah, that may be the first time we said penises and vaginas, but hopefully it won't be the last.
But yeah, that I think is common because I think that's the overarching, like we're in the buckle of the Bible Belt
Mm,
in Dallas. I mean, there's a lot of that, and you have to be aware of it or fight of it. But like a fish in the ocean, it doesn't know it's in there
mhm,
until something kind of causes the fish to wake up and say, "Hey, why am I a fish? What is a
mhm.
fish?" Um, sorry, the ADD's kind of all over the
Oh
place.
man, it's good. That's why you're here. This is already worth it for me. This was a few years ago, and I won't say his name, but I will say he's a very popular, very well known contemporary Christian singer that I was working with. And we could not, there were only two doors that we could seem to go through. And this is in relation to what you were just saying. Previously, he felt that he had overindulged in what his body could do. He would label himself as a narcissist, right? He could only see that pursuit of physical health was to be overindulgent in matters of the flesh.
Mhm.
And the only other door that he could see himself going through is complete denial of anything that had to do with that. And he was overweight,
Mm.
and he continued to be overweight. And I don't have a great moral to the story, except that I believe that there's a third door. There are ways that you can, just as you described your own story, there's ways that these things can work together, and I believe that they have to, right?
Mm.
Because the word meta has been ruined by Facebook, but meta health, or like this
Integrated.
integrated, deep health that has to include your biology, that has to include psychology, it has to include your emotions, it has to include your social life, it has to include this existential component of why we're here on earth. They all work together.
Mm.
And so I think what you're hinting at, this dualistic or
Yeah.
Descartian way of looking at it, is a little short-sighted,
Mhm.
in that there are more dimensions. It's not, there's a third door, and the third door is, hey, everything works in concert, and if you're really as healthy as you say you are spiritually, then you should have no problem being able to reconcile why your physical health is just as important as anything else. And I see that a lot with what you're saying. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm just so. I'll stop right
Are
there,
you
right?
making fun of me?
No, 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 not,
That's
not
fine.
you, not you. But I think there is this, where we live, there's this tendency to say, you know what, because I'm spiritually healthy, that's all that matters. And the truth is that it's not. It's not all that matters.
Well, that's the integration thing. One thing that I really became passionate about was, I mean, if you're not a Christian, forgive me. I'm just telling you my story. It's not your story, but uh, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven or hell? Was like the reverberating, like boom, the drum beat. And so I'm obsessed with like living well on the way to heaven. And I think it's something that you can actually envision people for and bring them into because they want it. But I think pain tends to be the indicator for it because when you're coaching people and you're around them, they have these little sacred moments where they're entrusting their bodies to you as a coach. And all of a sudden they say these little comments, and you're like, there's something more to what's going on in their story that is spiritual. I mean, you see it like Russell Brand, the old comedian. I think he's pretty brilliant, super
Mhm.
spiritual. Wim Hof,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
got his book right here.
there you go.
This
I mean,
podcast brought to you by
Russell, I
Russell
want to be
Brand.
on your podcast. I want to
Recovery.
talk to you. Anyway, I I think there is, I think COVID did it, right? Like it stripped us all down to where like there's this collective, like, okay, why are we here? But it's super hard to integrate all those things. I mean,
That is true.
how was your day looking at screens? Well, my day was good. Would you like to watch some screens tonight instead of talk? I mean, it's hard to integrate. It's so hard because whether you think that it's spiritual or just kind of mind and body, to pull those things and be whole and integrated is very difficult to do. And so, anyway, that really doesn't. Yeah, so that it's very hard to do. but people want it, but it's hard to pull those things. I mean, like all of material things are moving towards entropy, right? So you have to like go against the cosmos,
Hmm.
which is not easy to do, specifically as it pertains to just your own personhood. So anyway,
It's really good, and I think it's a valid point that this thing that we're talking about is not. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. It's not even. It's not even easy to measure. I
mm,
think that's why we love fitness. It's because it's measurable.
hmm
It's very. It feels like you have autonomy. It feels like you have control. When we start to talk about spiritual health, it's like, well, how do you measure that? And so we revert back to ways that you can measure it. Oh, I
mm,
read my Bible every day. Oh, I prayed. Oh, I did these things. And the truth is that those are deep, murky waters, but they're no less true. And I think a great definition of health is that we're thriving in all dimensions of human experience, which is a constantly moving target.
mm,
We're never gonna nail it.
never arrive.
But I think if we believe that health is a system, then there's always going to be a limiting factor. And I think that is a way to bring order from chaos is to say, okay, of all these dimensions that we're talking about, where am I the weakest? Where is it that I need the most coaching? And I was thinking a week ago that no one ever said, you know what, John got my bench press up 30 pounds and it changed my life, right? Nobody ever said that.
Mm-mm.
But bench press technique is important and that's important. But I think coaching is helping people change. Increasing your bench press, I guess that could be a mechanism of change. But where I see fitness going and what you alluded to post COVID is that you want to change somebody's life.
Mm,
You don't just want to change their body. That's why we find coaching so invigorating.
hmm
That's probably the connection between being a pastor and being a coach is you recognize that the thing you're doing isn't surface level, which is to say, and this is what I believe, that we're in the transformation business. I'd love to come up with a word that doesn't sound so churchy, but that's all I got so far.
I I'm fascinated with transformation. That's probably my biggest passion. But yeah, I'm fat. It's a wonderful, wonderful word. Excuse me, but it is so hard to measure. It's very difficult to even discuss or talk about. But I think it's the envisioning of it is that you can. There's some things that you can transform, which gives you hope. And then, of course, CrossFit is always, at least for me, it can be very emasculating because I'm like, I can't do that. But just being able to like be aware of my body is like there's an awareness of it. Like I can the body keeps a score. If you have not read it, maybe think about it. But you want to be spiritually healthy. Well, the body keeps the score to kind of indicate where you're at spiritually, where you're at emotionally, whether you're at mentally. The
Mm,
body's going to keep the score.
mm,
And I don't mean like because you know blew out a shoulder, hurt yourself, but just in general. Like even this morning, uh, I would say part of what that journey that started in 2018 was like I needed a new rule of life because the rules that I had before weren't working.
mm,
I needed new practices to help me spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Because when you've had as many kids that have lived in my house and as many intense things that have happened, both self inflicted and externally, I mean, like it's pretty nuts. So I needed some practices to basically have, I guess, the internal bandwidth to be able to handle the external forces. And so this morning I was doing my Wim Hof breathing. Um, and I would pause and just try to pay attention, like, where am I carrying stress? Because I got a lot going on right now. So I got up my neck, a little bit my back, and my mind was racing because I want to do this well. I want to be in, I love this. I love talking. And so I want to do this well. I want to show up and show out or whatever. But I've just got a lot of stress. And so paying attention to my body, what's going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is hard to do because,
mhm,
again, like I mentioned, my day of looking at screens is coming. And so it's very difficult. So that's why I like this idea of the physical nature of it. Like I have a practice now
mhm,
where I work out a lot. I try to work out more or less daily, do something,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel that gives me more of an internal strength to deal with, or like to take out the disappointment because the sale didn't close, or the tension, the relational tension from, whether it's marriage or whether it's work. And so it gave me some place to focus some of my own personal intensity in an appropriate way,
Mm-hmm.
a safe way. So, as is appropriate, is what Dallas Willard would say, to handle that emotional context, that spiritual context, um, in a safe, appropriate way, as you're trying to lift a barbell over your head.
Mm.
Um, so anyway,
That's really good. If you had a, I'm curious, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it, and tomorrow you've come up with this integrated practice, this thing that someone could prescribe to, and there's no value judgments, there's no arguing on theology, but it's incorporated all of these aspects of health that you've alluded to. What would that look like? I know that's a big question, but you're a big thinker. I think you can handle it. You can drink this coffee.
can you ask it again?
What would a multidimensional health practice that you were going to coach someone else through look like?
Uh, it would be very. It might be called a cult.
Okay,
Which
what
is
that's a better question. What does your cult look like?
It would probably it would be very countercultural because and where you
Good.
and I both live, it's so hard. There's so many demands on your time, so many demands on work, and I think you see this like with this desire to kind of get back. I mean, let me start over. It's very difficult to actually live wholeheartedly in our world in Dallas, geographically where I live, because there's so many different things that are pulling at you.
Mm-hmm.
And I see both in businesses, like this desire, it's a farm to table. Like they want to have this local, organic feel, this natural, what does Huberman say? He's like, get out and stare at the sun first thing in the morning and go ground. And I'm like, what world are you living in?
Yeah,
It's
get
already
some sun in your retinas no matter
yeah,
what.
yeah.
Mhm.
9,000 different studies have been done to articulate that when your eyes burn with the light of 1,000 suns, you will live till you're 42, and erectile dysfunction will be a thing of the past. So anyway, you can edit all of that out, but there's this kind of like organic kind of like people are saying there's got to be a little bit more to it. How do we get back? But then the rule of life, like how do you actually set up boundaries that will make that happen? So, man, it has to deal with stuff that people don't want to deal with.
Mm.
And if you want to be a good athlete, I mean, I think we saw it was what's that Mal O'Brien.
Mm-hmm.
She had to step out from the games this year. She probably would have won because something wasn't going on well, whether it was mental or emotional. I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I have no judgment. And I'm like, do what you got to do, girl.
Who knows? Maybe hormonal. Yeah. It's just conspiracy theory there.
Is that really?
Yeah.
I didn't look.
No.
Oh, I got the injection. Which can we talk about testosterone? Is
Sure.
that a thing I should like try steroids so I can really go?
What's the question?
I want to do steroids to get like really jacked. That's probably more than narcissist.
Yeah. Just to get jacked?
Yeah. Sorry, we got to come back. You can edit this. Your question.
That's a detour from
Yeah.
health, huh? You more quickly die from overconsumption of Advil than you would testosterone.
As I proved
That's a
in
fact.
2021.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So your question, what would it look like? It would probably look like a small group of people that were committed to a certain type of lifestyle, that were going to hold each other accountable, and that were going to consider how their vocation, what they did for work, and their family time, their emotional, their past, their present, what they want for the community and around them. It'd be this very internal and external process where you're really doing what a lot of what y'all do here at BPR, from like looking at their what's the scan thing that y'all do?
In body.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're actually having like a real assessment of where you're at spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, looking at your vocation, trying to integrate those things and then articulating a path forward for them that involves the physical nature of it, that involves their body type, that involves their spiritual makeup and their background, and involves some thinking and community. But in essence, the goal of it would be transformation
Mm-hmm.
and not, unto being an influencer and making more money or being successful, but rather to living really well. Like I'm more obsessed with that. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
can you live really well? And that's usually going to involve connections to others, a job that, you don't want to smash the computer out and go to happy hour every day,
Mm-hmm.
but something that's giving you life, like living well now, because you have no idea. We cannot control what happens tomorrow. You know this. You cannot control whether or not you have a traumatic brain injury on your 41st birthday. You can't control these things, but you can choose to live well. And then taking those integrated approaches physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, in such a way that the pressures of life, the chaos, the entropy of life, you're somewhat resistant to. At least you can overcome it more, I guess, adaptly, become more adept, excuse me, is the word I'm looking for. So
Mm.
that was a word salad sandwich
And
of nothing.
it's a good answer. I have one more question for you. Would it need to incorporate the Judeo-Christian ethic? Would it have to be overtly Christian?
You know, uh, to terrify some of my people I know. No, you would ask me a question, just as a former pastor, what's your spiritual life like now? And I'm finding a lot of life in the Russell Brands and some
Mm-hmm.
others that
Mm-hmm.
aren't Christians, but it's actually grounding me back in my
Mm-hmm.
historic Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that my stream has lost is being able to create a vision of human flourishing that exists outside of just the church. So
That's so good. Say it so the people in the back can hear it. That's so good.
I think one of the things that my stream of Christianity has missed out on is creating a vision of human flourishing that involves people who may or may not have the same spiritual, theological values as you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, I'm not judging. I'm not saying. I'm just telling you my story. So where I came from, anything outside of one man and one woman together in a sexual context is bad. But how can you create an actual vision for someone with different sexual practices that involves human flourishing and that doesn't
Yes.
bring degradation and hell
Yes.
and Sheol to them? So sexually, emotionally, spiritually, and I think what I like about Joe Rogan is that he brings people from different paths and they can kind of find common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And in this bipolar world that we live in now, it's this is legit in America. Like it's not the same in other Western nations like England, but like you can't if you're pro guns, then you're probably all the way on the right. If you're liberal, you're all the way on the left. You can't actually come together and
Mm.
create anything that where you're like, well, actually, I'm um, anti-abortion and anti-gun, but I'm pro whatever. Like that was a bad example, but it's so binary, it's so set apart that there's no common ground, and this huge chasm is being
Yeah.
shared. So
Maybe we don't completely make sense.
yeah, and I think I I think there's really interesting ways on the spiritual side. During this, I mentioned rule of life, but when I got into the emotional, spiritual health, I got into all these mystical practices, like the Desert
Crystals.
Fathers,
Yeah.
not crystals, yes,
Chakras. Your
chakras.
root chakra is
Yeah, I don't know what
burning
that
hot.
is,
Okay.
but
You
shrooms.
can
Have
look
you
it up
done
after.
shrooms?
Never have.
Yeah, shrooms.
Never have.
I didn't get into shrooms yet. However, so we get in these spiritual practices, and part of it's like being silent
Mm-hmm.
and breathing and listening, which some Christians would freak out about, but like you're trying to open the door spiritually and you're like, is it a demon? Did I give myself a demon because I was quiet and breathing? Is there a demon there? Help me, Lord Jesus. I'm not joking. It's weird. It's like, can I actually pray like this where I don't actually pray and don't read the Bible, but try and listen to Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of some Buddhist practices, some yoga practices in there, which I'm not commenting on the spiritual nature of it, but it's like it's like proving, in my estimation, Christianity right. So there's these really interesting ways, I think, where that, yes, you can include people that have a different spiritual practice in that and open the door up to that spiritual side of your life, which just saying that out loud, I'm hearing some of it. Don't give the devil a foothold.
I like that
It's always
it's her voice, right? That's the voice of Southern Christianity
Yeah.
is church lady
yeah.
with the Southern
Or
accent.
church man. Hey,
Yeah.
hey, I love. It's a little bit like
With the same pitch and tone.
you just
Yeah.
It's they're married. They have 5 kids in homeschool. I shout out homeschoolers. They
Shout
were
out to
ready for
homeschool.
COVID more than the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, I do think there is a place for it. I don't know how to handle it all the way, because I do think, like, from a Christian standpoint, you should have some boundaries and some historic practices um, that are good and right and true. However, I think there is a place for it for sure, because it levels the playing field so that people have a chance to access it, and at the same time, you can create a vision for them in such a way that they can flourish regardless,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the differences theologically or spiritually, ecumenically, grammatically.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing those in there.
Yeah.
It makes me think of this is going to be a pivot, but I think it's in context of what we're talking about. You were talking, I was thinking, like, man, is there some institution that's done this well? Because fitness, if we're going back to this building that we're sitting in, it's already exclusive, right? You have to pay to be here, so it already eliminates a huge amount of the population. But then this is my own personal bias, so forgive me if this is you and you're watching this, but to make it overtly Christian, because that's what you believe, is to automatically, from the get-go, make it even more exclusive, where it should be inclusive, right? This thing that we're talking about, health, there doesn't need to be any more barriers of entry than it already has, because it's already hard. And then to make it even more exclusive, that you have to say that you don't have the complete high resolution picture unless there's a theistic component of this, I agree with you. I think is unnecessary. And so I'm thinking, like, what's another organization that's done this and done it well? And I think it's Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It made me think, maybe just because we had like the Russell Brand book, and you might be surprised. We've never talked about this, to know that I'm 2,686 days sober. So this thing I'm talking about, I know very well. And what Alcoholics Anonymous does really well is they introduce this concept of spirituality, but they don't put a label on it. Even in the first page of the pamphlet, they say, hey, even though we're meeting in the basement of a church, we don't have any religious affiliation. And what's beautiful there, and look, AA is based on dysfunction. That's what everybody has in common. But to take that a few steps further, you have people that are agnostic, that are atheist. You have all different types of religion. Like, it is the perfect example of this thing that we're talking about that goes down. And what everyone has in common is a desire to not continue to live the life that they have lived. And so I think it's a beautiful example of how, and you mentioned, like, psychedelics, and anthropologically, humans have been experiencing something spiritual, and let's define that there is something greater than themselves.
You do the opposite. The materialism is like what you can see and measure is all that is. So spiritual would be like, well, how do you measure what you can't measure?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And in AA, God stands for good, orderly direction, right? That's the acronym, which is beautiful, right? It's beautiful. It's like, hey, there's something bigger than myself. There's something outside. I can recognize that that's true. I think most humans, even if they don't ascribe to religion, they can say, hey, I believe that there is something outside of just me, right? Most people, even atheists, agnostics, most can wrap their head around there is something outside of just what I am feeling.
Mhm.
And I think that's a great footing, because there's two aspects, right? There's the behavior, and I've harped on that. Like, if you want any type of multidimensional health, like, it comes down to behavior modification, but a level deeper than that is what's your reason for doing it.
Yeah.
And you can't come up with a reason outside of purpose.
Mm.
But all of that is really just the human side of spirituality. And I think you open the door, and you don't say that the door doesn't exist, but you don't force people to go through the door and be like, yeah, there totally is a theistic dimension of this. But we're just going to focus on you. We're going to focus on, what do you think the reason for you doing these things are?
Mm.
What do you think is the reason that you're in this life?
Mm.
And what's beautiful there is, like, hey, any answer you come up with, I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, cool. And I think without that, I can't tell you how many times someone's come to me, and we talked about this before. It's like, hey, why are you doing this? I don't know. Seems like a good idea. It's like, well, don't like your chances of continuing it. But then there's that other camp that we talked about that's so deeply rooted in meaning, but their actions and their behaviors are incongruent with that.
Mm.
And so I think you need them both. And I've seen it go down a lot without any type of purpose or reason, and it's really hard to sustain that. And so I think it's this place of going back and forth where meaning and purpose, I think, are also malleable. I think it changes, right?
Oh, yeah.
The reason that you and I exercise now as fathers with kids looks a lot different than when we were 22 and bench pressing. So anyways, I think that this thing that as coaches, we're a little afraid to touch because we don't want to put religion down someone's throat. It doesn't have to be like that, right? You've said it.
Oh,
And
dude,
I've said it.
when I first started, Talk was one of our coaches. He's got more degrees than I can shake a stick at. He's Japanese Buddhist, and I went to like an 8:15 class for whatever reason. I think I was still on my not being fired but break, and so he looks at me and he's like, John, he goes, tell me about your family. I'm like, the hell, dude? I go, why are you asking about that? He goes, your feet. He goes, you're very unstable, like ankle mobility or something like that. And he says, that tells me that your foundation is pretty much cracked. And it tells me that you have some issues with your family. I'm like, what?
Who is this?
This Talk, one of my former coaches, was really impactful. And he was like the opposite of what I thought a CrossFit guy would look like, because very sensitive, very kind. He wanted to lead people into like some sort of like kind of breathing and just awareness of what was going on. And, everyone with their screen time, as soon as they, thunder effed the bar, they were done. They're like, here we go. And looking at their phones and going out. And so he was fascinating to me. But he kind of read my mail. He's basically saying, your body's telling me that there's something wrong with you that's beyond just the fact that you've only bench pressed and drank Miller Genuine Draft for the last couple of years, So I think it's hard, because you had asked, like, somewhere along the lines, you're like, well, how do you do this in coaching? Because part of what I would like to do is offer, like, hey, I tell people all the time, I'm like, you need to work on your breath. I'll send them some resources, knees over toes guy, whatever. But on the spiritual side, like, how do you address that? Because it's not easy, especially if you haven't been trained in it. Because you have all these sacred moments that happen where all of a sudden somebody shares something with you, and you're like, how do you handle that? Because you don't know, or you're trying to over Christianize it or whatever else, or you just don't know. Because what really boils down to is intimacy. And much like this podcast where you're staring through my soul, it's a lot. And that's why I skip a lot of his Instagram posts. I'm like, God, Nick, leave me alone. I'm just trying to handle it. Yeah. But man, it's so, I don't know how you would do that unless they had kind of been invited into it, like you said, and they chose to walk through that door to talk more about it, because they'll give you hints about it, whether you're paying attention to how their body's moving in the gym, or just the things they say, the things they talk about when it gets beyond the weather and what truck they're about to buy or whatever, or how that thing that happened with their kid. And all of a sudden these little cracks in the armor come up, and then like it does open a door to that spiritual side of it, and just feeling out who those people who are willing to talk about it is fascinating. But I think it'd be wise. I mean, Wim Hof and Brand did that thing where they were like out in the rain. I don't know if you saw this on Instagram, but like they literally were like doing his, whatever he calls it, and they're like sitting there meditating and like breathing together. I'm like, y'all are having a church service, sans Jesus. And they're there for it. They did jujitsu and like all yoga stuff. I'm like, this is crazy. So I don't know how you would incorporate that like at a box. But to me, it's kind of like along the way. It's like along the way, these little conversations that appear, little cracks or moments of like vulnerability where they're kind of saying, hey, the material stuff isn't there. And it could be because like I did when I sent you that video last summer, I was like, how's my snatch looking? Like how does it look in my hips and my arms? And all you came back with was why? Why does it matter? I was like, freaking a-hole. He's like, you literally said, do you want a pat on the back? I'm like, no, I want to know how to get better at this. Anyway, and but what was going on? There was a lot going on in me emotionally and spiritually, sitting there, sending you a video, which my wife was always like, I can't believe you send a video to people of you lifting. I'm like, it seems pretty natural to me.
Well, it's a good, and I didn't make that up. I actually got that from Nick Manos, who, do you know Nick?
Oh, of course.
Nick was a Young Life guy for a long, long time. But I heard him say that, like when somebody brings up a question, it's a great clarification to say like, hey, are you actually wanting my advice? Or are you just wanting like a high five? But I think that you're right to comment on what you said in the physical gym setting. You probably don't want to lead with that. Probably don't want to like jam that down someone's throat. But if they want to walk through that door, hey, I'm right on their tail. Asking good questions seems like a great start. I also think that there's some connection between spiritual health and coping, to use like a psychological term. And I found that oftentimes if someone's life is all sunshine and roses, they don't have a need to cope, right? Which is to say, like, they don't need to even ask some of those questions. So it's not like I'm wanting their life to suck. But I find that these conversations are a lot easier to have when how should I say this? When the sun hasn't shone on their life, right?
Philip
You mentioned, yeah.
Pain is the gift that nobody wants. He tells the story of this missionary group in India in a leprosy camp, and this guy starts running, which he's not supposed to do. His foot literally breaks off, so he's running on his nub, and they chastise him, but he's so excited because he ran and whatever he got. And so pain, I hate pain. But pain is this gift that makes you come alive and be aware. And like there's something that your body, whether it's like my Terry's minor, I had to work on a lot because when I was in the front rack position and trying to do bar muscle ups, there's something that was going off. So just that hurt. So I worked on it. It's indicating, hey, pay attention, something's going on. And so coping, we look at like my proclivity to previously tobacco, now just some nicotine, but like, why are you doing that? You're ramping up here. Like you're getting emotional. Pay attention. Your body's keeping the score. It's trying to tell you something. And yeah, but it's so freaking hard to do that today because there's so many different ways to just freaking
not pay attention,
not be present. And it's freaking hard. And so CrossFit fitness gives you a very practical way to pay attention to what's going on in your body and why it's there. So
yeah, man. You ever heard of urge surfing?
No.
This is a concept in psychology where I'm
glad we're not talking about like wakeboarding or actual surfing because I'm terrible at all of those
No,
things.
yeah, it's just a metaphor. But yeah, I think what you said is a great example of how, man, you could be dialed in spiritually, but you need the psychological tools, right? Like you could have,
Practices.
yeah, and this practice is a great one along the lines of behavior modification is that we all have these urges, but just like a wave, there's there's a swell, there's a crest, but then every surfer knows that the wave will dissipate. And that's much like an urge where you're supposed to pay attention, write it out, not
Notice
make
it.
any judgments, notice it,
Mhm.
and then reconcile that, like, hey, 30 minutes from now, like, it's probably not going to be that strong of an urge. I don't know, it just made me think of that while you were saying that.
Mm.
Well, before we put a bow on this, a call to action is these things that we're talking about, this way of incorporating multi dimensions of health. We are going to be running a beta group end of September. Man, if you've made it this far in this episode, you certainly are picking up what we're putting down, or at least are interested in these things of not just saying that thrusters and pull ups will solve all of your problems, or that reading the Bible and praying will solve all your problems, that it's a complicated, messy, imperfect attempt to try to flourish in all these different areas of your life. And if that is true, you should probably keep watching. Probably click the buttons that you're supposed to click. Anyways, but as far as the beta group goes, we'll have some more information on that as we figure out what that actually means. John, how should we close out?
The Christian in me is, let's all pray.
Let's pray.
Dear Lord Jesus. I don't know, man. Whatever you want. We can do some breathing, pay attention.
Well, I do want to acknowledge that I've said, like a stupid American, I've said Wim Hof.
Wim Hof.
And I realized that you've been saying Wim Hof.
Is that right?
It sounds right, just like Wagner is Wagner in German. Is he German?
Mm.
Well, I feel like if nothing else, if people realize that they've been saying it wrong this whole time, that's valuable.
Legit try to be culturally appropriate. Believe it or not, honor
Mhm.
how people's names. Anyway, but no idea.
Well, I feel like we just scratched the surface. I hope that we can do a few more of these and maybe dig into some of the specifics versus just painting a very broad brushstroke approach. Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, man. Anytime. Thanks for the coffee.